So thank you for your introduction, and thank you very much to still here, because I'm the last one speaker, and I will try to be breve, and the process of documentation and musical cataloging in Mexico have relatively short history. 80 years ago, Miguel Bernal Jimenez published the first catalog on a small 18th century musical archive that belonged to College of Santa Rosa in Valladolid, today Morelia. This first catalog was a revelation at the time, but it has important limitations. After several decades, other researchers have published increasingly comprehensive and useful catalogs to try to adapt to international cataloging standards. I would like to talk about the cataloging project we have begun to do in a couple of archives with poetic musical sources of New Spain. The first one, Archdiocese of Antequera, Oaxaca, and second, College of Santa Rosa in Morelia. Our collaborative project has been characterized by the interdisciplinary approach between musicology and philology. Anastasia Krutitskaya and I have formed a working group with students of philology and musicology, respectively, to study, edit, and catalog the sources mentioned under the cataloging criteria of RISM. The interdisciplinary work allows us to have broader points of view with a good amount of discussion as well, but I believe that it has brought positive results in our cataloging and critical editing project. This is important to consider that we have worked from manuscripts as primary sources, and sometimes we resorted to printed materials of 17th and 18th century to identify concordance in literary and text and mainly. One of the challenges as a cataloging theme has been to identify which factors define or condition the concept of work in an Hispanic music archive and how this can be understood by the cataloging team with contemporary interpretation criteria. Finally, the interpretation and way of understanding the sources and their content by the cataloger will determine the characteristics and purpose of their product. Some factors that influence this process are the physical organization of sources the moment that cataloging team begins to work. It is an important factor because it's the result of previous inventory criteria and even erroneous manipulations of documents through almost 3 centuries that produce a strong influence and affect the cataloging process. The catalogers unconsciously accept an order in which the corpus is established and then make decisions. A couple of examples of cataloging work in the archive of Archdiocese of Antequera, Oaxaca in Mexico can better explain this idea. In 1970, Robert Stevenson made a list of works contained in that documentary collection. He grouped the works by composers. It can be noticed that a couple of cantatas, como Aunque Culpa and Alegres Luces, both composed by Manuel de Sumaya, they appear as separate titles. 20 years later, in the decade of 1990, Aurelio Tello published a catalog and then a critical edition of Villancicos and Cantatas by Sumaya. In both publications, the mentioned couple of cantatas, Alegres Luces and Como Aunque Culpa, were worked separately. In the field of musical interpretation, these works have been recorded by different ensembles, always as two titles. Our team planned to recatalog only the corpus of Villancicos and Cantatas from the Archive of Music of Archdiocese of Oaxaca. One of the advantages of following the complex model of RISM template is it allows us to identify vocal and instrumental correlation as well as concordance of watermarks between these cantatas, to demonstrate that these two separate titles make up a single cantata. Then, the polemic concept of work is very relative because changed according to the processes of documentation, cataloging, and interpretation of who works with the sources. Another aspect that tends to be a factor for the modern ordering of all archive is the filiation of the document to the name of the composer. The Music Archive of Santa Rosa College has been recently arranged alphabetically by name of the musical composer. However, when one carefully observes the old music papers, it can be noted that the old signatures on cover of each work suggest that an antiquated order of these papers was but gender. For example, when already realized that signature number 45, for example, corresponded to the scenic music such loas and comedias, for example, the Monster of the Gardens and Echo in Narciso. If we pay attention in these aspects, we could understand better the original conformation of this archive. An aspect that is not usually visible in the old musical papers is the identification of literary author of each work. However, this aspect is very important. I have been working with a philologist. For this reason, the searching for literary concordances is done systematically. And this has given us satisfactory results in the cataloging process. For example, some of the literary texts of loas, comedias, and autos sacramentales that we found in this archive were written by the famous Spanish Golden Age poet Pedro Calderón de la Barca. The next topic considers cases in which the cataloger must establish criteria of importance or hierarchy. Which of the following three aspects, for example, tends to be more significant for the cataloger? First one, the source and its grouping in a folder. Follow the musical text or the literary text. One of the characteristics of a current state of the manuscript repertories of musical sources in New Spain, mainly in the case of genres written in Spanish, such as Villancicos, Cantatas, Loas, is that in many cases one copy, title, or maybe a work in this case, is preserved only in one manuscript item. However, there are some peculiar cases from Santa Rosa College archive. For example, one cantata by Corradini and Rivero. This folder has two copies of one cantata that has three literary texts, but the same music. In the first copy, we found two literary texts. Dios sacramentado. A second text, Dulce Pan Sagrado. It was stuck on small pieces of paper on the first text. In other copy, we have a third literary text, but the same music that before document, Gertrudis Sagrada. This slide shows cover paper of this cantata. In this one, we can read the original literary text, Dios sacramentado. In this one, we can read the original literary text. Excuse me. Here we have a little piece of paper with the second literary text. Look at the melody and compare with next slide. This copy has the same musical material that the last one, but with another text that refers to another religious festivity. Obviously, the Santa Rosa Scholar Girls used their music papers to use them in different religious festivities. So I have some questions. How many words we have? Musicologists and philologists will have the same idea. We should catalog this cantata as contrafacta kind. How many Muscat records we need to do? Last consideration. This moment I have more questions than answers, and we recognize that our competence in documentation and cataloging in Morelia is starting, and we hope to gain experience and efficiency in this work. With this, in the not too distant future, we can to start using some of the technological tools that have been mentioned throughout this conference in place to identify, catalog, and disseminate the Latin American poetic musical sources without forgetting that collaborative and interdisciplinary work is need that demands our actuality. I welcome the opportunity to come and learn through each of the presentations that have been carried out here. Thanks for your attention.